And so, guys, like there has been a constant groundswell of people on social media continuously complaining about what the Democrats have or have not done for Black America. Is today's Democratic Party doing enough for Black and brown people in the United States of America?
No.
I don't know.
I say no. And I say no because if they were, then white Democrats would not be fearful of voting for Black Democrat candidates. And then I also feel like a lot of the Black people feel like, the Black voters feel like they're being pimped for their voters as well. They're voting.
I'm going to say, and just give a little bit of a pushback and say that, number one, I don't think that white Democratic voters are afraid to vote for Black candidates because they do. The vice president of the United States of America, for the first time in our history, is a Black woman. Number two, you have for the first time in American history a Black woman on the precipice of being the first Black female governor in the United States in a southern state, Georgia, the stronghold of the Confederacy. You have to look at the number or the increased number of Black men who are now on the verge of being senators. You have Mandela Barnes, we have Cory Booker. We're making strides. So I don't think that white Democrats are afraid to vote for, Black leadership. I don't think that's the case at all.
I disagree.
And I also believe, this last point, I'll let it go, I believe the whole concept of the Democratic Party not doing for Black people is an absolute myth that's being propagated by social media and paid actors.
Yep.
Because they want you as a Black person to feel as though the Democratic Party because Black people in America is the number one voting bloc of any party, and we go 90% for the Democratic Party in almost every single election. And when we don't go 90%, it's never lower than 80%. And when we get there, we're turning out in mass numbers, voting for one party. There's no way Republicans are going to be able to ever break through in states that are heavily consisting of Black people and win elections if they don't find a way to pull us from the Democratic Party. And the only way they can do that is through lies and deception, because their policies aren't going to do it.
Correct.
Their policies are the antithesis of movement for the Black community. So I think the whole concept of Democrats not doing anything for us is a myth.
So I want to ask you, where's the percentage of the voting in small cities or small towns, like for these Confederate states? Like, do you know that percentage?
It depends. It's like state by state, right? Like, so it's also per population. So you have some states like the state of Georgia. Mm-hmm. Georgia consists of 32% Black voters, Black population, and then 38% overall people of color when you incorporate our brown brothers and sisters and our Jewish brothers and sisters. Mm-hmm. And then that number goes up even more if you incorporate members of the LGBTQIA+, they just make it about the marginalized voters in general. Mm-hmm. And that turnout is always strong and it's always heavy, and the voters here are mobilized to come out. But when you look at a state like Mississippi, that actually has 38% of their population being Black people, and then being like 42% when you add in our brown brothers and sisters, and even more than that when you add in LGBTQIA+, the vote there is exceptionally depressed. So it's at a much lower rate, completely, totally different. So you have two southern states, not far, 4 hours in difference to get from one to the other, but totally different numbers in terms of voter turnout.
That's why I asked, because I have done a lot of political community work in small cities, especially here in Georgia. And the reason why I said that is because when I go down and I interact with the residents in these towns, especially people of color, the first thing they say is, oh, well, I don't know if I'm gonna vote for this person because he's Black or she's Black, they're not really doing much for us or whatever. And it goes back to what you said, the misinformation, the false advertisement that's been shown. But you have these same people in these communities that believe it. And so they make their decision based off the information that they see, not off what they research, because a lot of these people don't really know how to do that.
And that's your fault.
That is your fault. But that's not my fault, yes, because that's why I'm down there.
Let me tell you why.
That's why I'm down there. To educate them. But that's why I'm there. But that's my whole point that I'm making to you. A lot of people aren't doing what I'm doing. When I go to these communities and these small towns to talk and educate and show people that what you're saying is not true and this is actually what's happening, a lot of people are not doing that. And because a lot of people are not doing that, those residents, those people in those small town communities are voting based off of what they're shown on television. And that's why I said a lot of black voters feel like they're being pimped for their votes, because they're going off of what they've been shown and not what they've been researching on their own.
Yeah, I don't think that it's, well, I mean, I guess you could say it's partly false advertisement and misinformation, but I also think that it's lack of communication. I think that whenever something big happens in terms of just a new bill that's passed or donating $80 million to Ukraine or whatever, like the White House and the media, they make that known. Mm-hmm. Like it's I could quote it off the top of my head, but in terms of just our community, it's like, when is the last big press headline that we've seen that's been a score for just black people? We can talk student loan debt forgiveness, but that's, for the greater majority or whatever. But in terms of like the John Lewis policing bill and the George Floyd and just all these things that we know that directly affects us, when has that major headline happened? Because, and even if it has happened, is it really pushed through and funneled through and conveyed correctly so we can feel that we are being looked after? Because I actually am on the side of when he's saying being pimped for our vote. And I think I talked about this in earlier episodes where I feel like black people are just sort of being pigeonholed to the Democratic Party, because we're not going to go Republican. Well, I want to say we're not, but the majority of us that vote Democrat, black Democrats, are not going to sway over to the Republican because they're just so radical, and the MAGA, like, that does not represent or align to where we want to be. However, even if we vote Democrat, it's like we see some type of leverage there, but it's just so slow moving, or like we talked about in the last segment, incremental success. Yes, we have incremental change. We have, senators and potential governors and all these people that are coming onto the scene now, but in the midst of this slow moving, goal that we're trying to make, the frequency of our detriment and things that we're going through, it's happening too quick. So it's not matching.
I want to say two things. I know, Brian, you probably want to jump in. I want to say two things. Number one, we can say that student loan forgiveness isn't a black issue, but
I said it's.
But that's an example, though, right?
Yeah,
because here's the thing.
But
now I'm gonna get answered. So number one, though, when 40% of black graduates have student loan debt compared to 22% of white college graduates having student loan debt, and then you have over 50% of that 40% saying that their net worth is significantly impacted in a negative way by that student loan debt, that's 100% a black issue.
Correct.
Right. So what President Biden is doing and his administration is doing is they're trying to rectify historical damage and historical wrongs done to the black community. Now, when you talk about getting on the national stage and talking about something that's impacting the black community specifically, doing that will have probably more negative consequences from a political standpoint than positive consequences.
Because but why is that our issue, though? Because it still needs to be communicated again. So
because black people perpetuate the problem.
That shouldn't be a falter for us.
So as soon as President Biden gets on that stage, because you're assuming that the majority of black people are going to want to hear good news for black people. And my argument is they won't, because as soon as you get on that stage, you make this announcement, you do that to the black community, you're going to have a whole entire network of paid actors like Marcel, a whole Candace Owens, a whole Kanye West now goes.
Exactly.
They're gonna be right there ready to attack it.
Okay,
they're gonna be right there ready to attack it and use their media influence to convince black people that it's not positive,
but I do
and that it's not good. Now, the responsibility of communicating this message, it doesn't fall on getting on MSNBC and ABC and CNN. It falls on black media if they care about black people. We used to have Jet Magazine. We used to have Ebony. We used to have platforms that will communicate and that were beholden and uplifted by the black community. That was their job.
Yeah.
What we have now is that doesn't exist. So black people, when I was growing up, my family went to Ebony and they went to Jet and for specific news about the black community.
Right.
Now, where do black people go? They
Social media.
They go to Shade
Neighborhood
Room,
Talk.
Neighborhood Talk.
Yep.
Right.
And so we're counting on them to tell the story, and they're choosing to tell the story in a negative way to get clicks and views to be monetized. And some, like the Shade Room, are far worse than some like Neighborhood Talk. But they're all still doing the same thing. That's our problem. That's us. We're the problem. problem. We're the problem.
But why do you feel like we're the problem because of that? Like,
Because we feed that beast. We click those headlines.
Why?
We comment in there.
But why?
We do it because we have been trained to do so. And let me explain the training.
I still don't think that should knock properly communicating if we get a score. Like, I get all the stuff you're talking about, the Candace Owens and the Kanye West and all that. I think that's just a norm at this point. But just because that is guaranteed to happen does not mean that it should deter media or whatever outlet to still communicate what's happening in our community. Yeah. And even to what you just said, the erasing of student debt and all these things, like, yes, that is great for the Black community. But I know a big topic was when the Asian hate crime bill passed. And then we were like, well, we've been trying to get our bills passed, so on and so forth. I'm just saying this is what we saying. I'm just saying this is what we are saying.
But because they're uneducated and uneninformed, they are wrong.
Well, and here's the story, right? Let's talk about that, because a lot of people talked about the Asian hate crime bill and how it was, it was only for them and it's nothing for us, and we've been fighting for this for a long time, and we're the majority base vote. Now, here's the story: nobody ever talked about the banning of the no chokehold and no knock warrant
in Kentucky or nationwide.
No, nationwide. Okay. Nobody talked about that.
That was done through executive order.
That was done through executive order. Nobody talked about that. Nobody talks about the fact that not only is it student debt that was $10,000 that was delivered by the Biden-Harris administration, what people don't also talk about was the $20,000 that's going to be given for people who have Pell Grants. Now, here's the story. A lot of people don't know what Pell Grant means. Everybody who knew and who had the information and who was educated about it knows that Pell Grants was a nod to Black and brown people. As a Pell Grant recipient and a first-generation student in my family to go to college, an EOF, Educational Opportunity Fund graduate, I'm someone who could say that the majority of the people who have Pell Grants are people who are Black and brown. So that is definitely something that we need to talk about, but I don't hear that. And I want to talk about the media for a second, because it's not MSNBC, it's not CNN, it is the Shade Room, it is the Neighborhood Talk, it is the Jasmine brand, and we need to talk about how that has such leverage in our communities, because people want the likes, people want the tea, people want the people want the bullshit.
Right.
That's just the straight up truth.
Right.
And so people are consistently looking at that and seeing it as the gospel. And what they're doing is further perpetuating this misinformation and disinformation campaign. Let's be very real and let's talk. You have these people who are called FBA, the Free Black Americans, and the ADOS, American Descendants of Slaves, that are out there. There are people who are actually Black, who are paid actors, a part of that. There's people who actually have bought into that because they're uneducated. And then there's other people who are actual white people who go on social media and get stock images of Black people just so that they can talk.
Digital blackface.
Digital blackface, just so that they can talk and say that they're a Black person, that they hate the Biden-Harris administration because they've done nothing. And what happens is that the people who are uneducated, who don't know,
think they're
through
real.
no lack of their own, think it's real and buy into that bullshit, because that is what is amplified. And these people, by the way, hate Black immigrants, don't think that Black immigrants should have any of the rights that are afforded to people here in this country, and they feel that they should be at the forefront. And here's the reality of the situation: you have the Marcel Dixons, you have the Candace Owens, you have these other paid actors that are consistently propagating the misinformation campaigns that are out there. And it's creating this mentality where right now in this room, we're having this conversation about, well, has the Biden-Harris administration done enough for the Black community? And and let me just say this, because I want to pass it to you. The problem is that when we then have these conversations, we have fallacious arguments. We have things that are not backed up, that are not substantiated by the actual evidence. And then we say, well, yeah, that part of it we need to talk about, but not this. We need to talk about the whole picture. Who is it actually impacting? And when we talk about the policies, we have to talk about all of them. And the Biden-Harris administration has been doing everything in their power to centralize not only the needs of Black people, but for all minority people or minoritized individuals. Let me actually correct myself.
Individuals in the United States of America.
Yes, absolutely. So that's the point. And that's what upsets me about the conversation, that, we are divided by the people who are disinforming and misinforming our communities. And the minute that we start understanding that we have to look at scholarly research, we have to actually get civically engaged and understand the actual civic engagement, education, and we understand how government actually works, that's when we'll start getting ourselves out of this hole.
I'm curious to know the percentage of people that are affected and influenced by these paid social actors and all those folks? Because I know that they very much so exist, but even like if I don't follow the Shade Room, I really don't follow any of those social media blogs, but when I do tend to scroll, anything relating to politics, if it's not involving like some savvy clapback, really doesn't get the views like pop culture does. Right. So even in that in itself is even their lightweight of political I guess canvassing doesn't really affect the masses like I think people may choke it up to be. Like, is it really that
massive?
I think that it does. They
influence.
actually had a post, I don't know if it was earlier today or yesterday, where they were talking about Candace Owens coming out with a whole documentary about exposing the BLM movement, the organization, and how she's gone through all these neighborhoods or some of the victims that went to the BLM organization to help their family. And now, like, she's like, their house is in ruins, their bills haven't been paid, the cars evicted. And so she's like, there's hundreds of thousands of millions of dollars that this organization has had and has not done anything that they said it's going to do. And, you know, that was shown by the Shade Room, I believe it was. And like Zach was getting ready to say,
together.
yeah,
They're all funded
but it's
together.
Millions of views
So,
and hundreds of thousands of likes and comments.
Here's an
And I
example
think-
too, like we talked about. I think just not too long ago there was Charlemagne. What's his man's real name?
Leonard.
Because I ain't calling nobody God, but Jesus the Lord and Savior. So
I love Charlemagne.
Leonard McKelvey was on his show giving Killer Mike a platform to trash Stacey Abrams and kind of denigrate a black woman in favor of Brian Kemp, a man who you reposted a clip from 2014 where he said, all of these minority voters are going to then win and will never win again. This man said this in public record, not even ashamed to admit that he didn't want minorities in Georgia to vote and exercise their right to vote as citizens. Yet he's still, leading in some polls. Here's the thing. All these people, including Leonard, are paid by this conservative money because they're pumping it out there. And here's a benefit of a Candace Owens and a Marcel Dixon and all these people. No one's going to pay Brian to get here and spit these facts.
Right.
Because this is what 90% of Black America believes and holds to be true because it is. But the 10% of people that can be persuaded by your Candace Owens and your Marcel Dixons to do that dirty work, the conservatives are going to pay them big money because you only need 12% of the 100% to affect an election.
Right. Yeah.
That's what they're trying to pull from. Yeah. They're trying to bring that vote down and down and down with a specific target on black men as told to all of America by Steve Bannon of Breitbart News, one of the most racist, alt-right, hate-filled news organizations to ever exist in mainstream media.
Right.
Correct.
I did want to say something really quickly when you were saying about the Biden-Harris administration and just black people sort of, always complaining, yada, yada, yada about that. Oh, Democratic. I think for me, I'm for incremental success. Like, I appreciate the Biden-Harris administration. I'm not one of those people that's complaining and finding something and, attacking them at all. I'm not that type of person. However, I cannot negate that I think black people that feel this way is just looking at the Democratic Party in its totality, not of this recent administration. Because let's be honest, prior to Candace Owens and Kanye West and all these people, when I was little, middle school, elementary school, for my uncles and cousins and other relatives and people like that, they felt the same way that black people have been taking advantage of the Democratic Party. And this is 90s, this is the 80s. And so I just can't negate that. And this is, and you can maybe chime into this, who were the paid social actors during the 80s, during the 70s, during the 90s, when black people still felt the same way. So yes, the Biden-Harris administration is doing X, Y, Z, but we're not going to negate the fact that this is still a decade on decade on decade feeling that they've had. Not saying that they're wrong or right, but it has been existing for forever.
Right. So let me go ahead and say this. I think with that conversation, sometimes people, and I just heard this, I was literally in a speaking engagement when I was talking to a group of black men who are same gender loving, Adoti, shout out Adoti. I was in this conversation and one of the men, I'm not going to say his name because he's not relevant to this conversation. But anyway, He said the same thing that you're saying, right? The fact is, and he said, that, I just feel like the Democrats and the Republicans are the same party. Like, I just don't even know sometimes. Like, he's like, I live in New York. That's a special context, and I'm going to tell you why in a second. He says, I live in New York, and I'm telling you that I feel that, I vote Democrat because I know that they have my best interest at heart, but I also feel, right there's a contradiction. Right. Well, I know that they have my best interest at heart, but at the same time, I just feel like they take my vote for granted. And I said, here's the story. You have to look at the region, the bubble that you live in, right? Mm-hmm. In New York, New Jersey, Tri-State, shout out Tri-State. I'm from Brick City all day, every day, Newark, New Jersey. It's very blue. Right. And so when you think about that perspective, you may think at the state level, my vote really, I don't see much change in my life, whatever, for whatever reason. But you can't then translate that into other regions of the world like that are red.
Right.
We said this before in one of the shows. You have to have $6,600 or less to be able to qualify for Medicare and Medicaid here in the state of Georgia. And that disproportionately affects Black and brown people. Right. Mm-hmm. So when you think about the diametrically opposed messages, you see Brian Kemp, who's the current governor and a Republican from Georgia, who says, we don't need to expand Medicare and Medicaid. That's not my priority. Mm-hmm. And then you have Stacey Abrams, whose main priority is like on day one, I want to use $6.6 billion that is in the surplus to be able to expand Medicare and Medicaid. You see the difference. Yeah. Now, it may not say the semantics, the language, the actual syntax of her words may not be, you know what, we're going to do this for Black men. She has a Black men agenda where that's actually listed. Right. But when she's actually speaking about it, that may not be the semantics, but we have to understand that there is a larger political landscape that we have to play to. And that's called strategy. Yeah. And when we talk about it, we're nodding to you and we're saying, we gonna do this for us. Motherfucker, y'all gotta come with me and understand that this is what we're fighting. But people don't know that because they can't read in between the lines. Right. And they can't read in between the lines because they don't have the education. So here's the story. The thing that catches the clickbait and all that stuff won't tell you the fact that January 6th, Republicans are consistently trying to put that under the rug because they want to bow the knee to Trump. Yeah. Democrats have said that is a ridiculous, awful ass fucking mess. Mm-hmm. And we need to make sure that we right those wrongs. We need to continue these hearings. We need to make sure that we hold him accountable. That's one of the examples. Let's talk about abortion. Mm-hmm. Republicans are consistently talking about, and that's been the messaging in the past, that Republicans have been saying, well, it's a states' rights issue. How dare you say what's going to be for these states? We should have abortion be states' rights. Now that Roe v. Wade has been overturned by the Supreme Court of the United States, what do we see? Lindsey Graham putting out a bill to ban abortions on a national level. And he's on record saying the antithesis of what the Republicans have been running on, that it's a states issue. He said it is not a states issue. So when you think about it and you think about the Democrats and what they're fighting for, and they're like, absolutely not. Women should have the bodily autonomy because it is sacrosanct. There is a diametrically opposed viewpoint. And for people who don't understand that, they're either misinformed, naive, or plain right stupid. And I think it's really the uneducated component.
And so to answer your question, when you talk about people have always felt this way, the reality is they have always been. So in maybe perhaps your uncles and aunts' generation, they were called neoconservatives. Okay. Ronald Reagan and the Republicans were going after Black people to make them neoconservatives. Mm-hmm. And a lot of here's an example of a modern day neoconservative, someone who grew, like I said, they never voted Democrat in their adult life, is Lester Holt of NBC News. He was a Reagan Republican. Mm-hmm. Black people have always been, I wouldn't say, enthralled with the idea of I want to be different than the majority of these Blacks. Exactly I am a different kind of Negro. So therefore I will not be following the Democratic pack. I'll be different. Preach. And they do that work. Now I can't say there was a level of misinformation in the 80s and 90s and 2000s in the way that we have them now. Right. But these people have always existed. Always. You had in 1994 J.C. Watts of Oklahoma, who was a representative, and he was being paid large money, funded fully, of course, he was a Republican, to do that work, to tear down the Clinton administration. You had Black people come of power and become of media prominence during the administration of America's first Black and only Black president, President Barack Hussein Obama. So it's not new. They've always been there, and it's to what extent people were depressed and got that. Here is the counter to your argument about your family saying the Democratic Party has always not done what they should for Black people. I grew up with a totally different point of view and a totally different, background, right? My great grandmother would dress me up as a child when she dressed up to go vote every single election, many of them falling on my birthday of November the 3rd. It was a big deal. And we would go, and it would take 2 minutes to vote. But she would get fully dressed up in her church clothes to cast that vote. And it was a big deal. Leading up to every election, we would watch the news together. I remember the first presidential candidate I ever wanted to vote for as a child was Paul Dukakis of Massachusetts. I'll never forget that, right? Also, like Paul Tsongas, who was his competitor at that same time frame, but I think he jumped out of the race far early. All that to say, so my family always had and held leaders in esteem for the leaders they were.
Right.
It wasn't about the party, it was about the person. But the reality is there was no opportunity for black leadership in any party but the Democratic Party for a long time. And when you have black people saying the Democratic Party does nothing for me, then you're also tearing down all the black leaders in that party. You're not just saying being a Democrat isn't just about Kamala. It's not just about Stacey. It's about Corey. It's about Maxine.
Right.
It's about Val. It's about the whole coalition. And you tell me that these black people are all selling out their community. You're telling me that all these black people are working against the best interests of black people? Absolutely not. It is a fictitious myth being perpetuated by, I say, paid actors across the board. Conservative money is funding way too much. That is why 3+1 media exists right now.
But I wouldn't say selling out or working against. I think the question that may raise that portion of people is are they doing enough?
They're doing all they can when they don't have a majority in Congress to have the votes. You only have 48 Democratic senators in the Senate. And I'm saying
this question, are they doing enough, has been raised for the past decades, not in this current time.
And we have only had a supermajority twice.
When you haven't had.
We've only had a supermajority twice in my time frame, and for one of those supermajorities, it only lasted for 8 months.
Right,
and during that 8 months, 2 of the senators were out on leave.
And that's fine, but that still does not negate where they're coming from.
You cannot circumvent the way the American you can't.
Yeah, you can't. But
because people aren't educated, Vince, they're not realizing how government works. You cannot oversee. You can't say just because we have a Democratic president, I want to see immediate change. Because just because people don't know how government works, it can't. So when people are saying they haven't done enough, they need to give me times when Democrats had the ability to do more and they didn't do it. I feel as though President Biden, to his detriment, has aggressively pushed an agenda that benefits black people in America significantly more than other groups because
I agree.
Because of the pressure put on him by black people.
Yeah.
And what disappoints me is that he is not getting the benefit of that work from black people. Yeah. We're still attacking him, although he has had the most aggressive pro-black agenda of any president I've ever seen.
Is that not what we argued about 2 weeks ago when I was like, with black folk, you damn if you do, you damn if you don't.
Right. And I agree again. I agree.
We just argued about that.
The person who disagreed is not here.
Exactly.
I agree with
exactly.
100%.
I feel like it's because everyone just really wants everything to be right there in front of their face.
Today.
Today.
Not only they want it in their face, they want it to happen when they want it.
When they want it. And then it's like they want it where they really don't have to do anything. Like, it's no research.
Right.
Don't tell me, just show me. And it's like, well, when have you taken the opportunity to actually see what Biden has done? But rather, they go on social media, they go to these platforms like the Shade Room that says, oh, well, I still ain't getting my student loan debt paid off, and how they get theirs and I ain't get mine. And it's just like, what do you want him to do? Like, have you not seen what's going on? Have you not realized what's happened? Like, I see and hear so many people today say that, well, at least when Trump was in office, you could see what he was doing. And he was showing what he was doing. Biden ain't doing nothing. I'm like, are you kidding me? You see the mess that Trump has done.
The mess.
But what is the good that you've seen Trump do, right? So I feel like we gotta, it goes back to what you said earlier. You gotta get out, and those that are educated, such as yourself, those that are like us, we have to get out in the communities and take the effort to educate the uneducated, because that's the only way we can start festering to everyone and keep it going, keep the momentum going so that they would not continue to have kids that will grow up thinking that the Democratic Party, they are really just the same as the Republican. There is no need to have two separate parties. You know what I'm saying? We have to do that. We have to put in and fill in that gap, because right now, today, our society only feeds off of what's been shown on their phones, social media, or what they can see right for face value, but not what's done behind the scenes.
Yes, and we also need to understand, yes, education is very important. People need to know how government functions so that we can get things through. I also want to say this. Once we do vote, right, because voting is a very essential component to this democratic process. Once we vote for people who have this priority on their minds, we can actually get the things done. We can actually abolish the filibuster, right, which is something that a lot of people we want to talk about. Abolish the filibuster and get things through on a 50-plus majority instead of a 60 majority, and actually get things done like the Voting Rights Act, getting people automatically registered to vote as soon as they turn 18, making sure that we codify Roe v. Wade.